Hello, this is my first go at this critique, analysis, review sort of thing. I do not possess the required abilities for this, nor the elegant fancy words like ludonarrative dissonance. I don't even have the soothing voice that seemingly every single one of these guys have, but nonetheless, with all odds against my favor, I am still going to make this video because honestly, who's going to notice anyway? First off, Blasphemous is a dark Christian-like Metroidvania with lots of grim and gore to its aesthetic, and that is something the game definitely gets right and fully commits to. The game surprised me with how it fared against my prior expectations. All I've heard about this game is that it's a 2D Metroidvania Souls-like and general praise, so I went in and saw how the game was much different than what I had in mind. I expected different weapon types. I got only one weapon with a single moveset. I expected enemies that required rolling out of their attacks. I discovered that I would be using parrying and just moving out of the way a lot more instead. I assumed I would be able to level up. Instead, I could only upgrade my weapon for some extra attacks, and the more I played the game, the more I saw how far off my expectations were. This isn't exactly something that made the game less. Just keep in mind that Blasphemous should be kind of isolated from the general labels it has sticking on it. And while this is a critique, I felt it fair to mention the fact that this game's art style and pixel art is quite gorgeous and different from most things you'll typically see in similar games. Also, this won't have any story spoilers, but will only for some of the enemies and bosses in the game. With all of that done, now I'll be going loosely into different aspects of the game and what I think about them. Opening cutscene starts and goes on about concepts of grief, guilt and regret, and sets off the disturbing tone that is quite fitting for the game. Then you're at the starting area receiving a brief tutorial about most of the basic mechanics, and immediately fight your first boss afterwards, which is easy enough to grasp. You continue your way through, get introduced to the rest of the mechanics, get to the city, which is almost like a hub, and meet a guy who talks in tongues but basically tells you to go to 3 distinct areas, gather something from each to be able to continue your path forward. And thus, you've got your motivation. Or do you? So you're only told what to do, but you never really get a full grasp on why you're doing it. This is common among many games like the Souls series, but at least in there you had some sort of purpose and understanding of everything around you. Here you don't understand shit. You're a penitent one, but what is that supposed to mean? What is happening to everyone around you? Why are the enemies enemies? Just because they attack you? Some of them are horrific, sure, but many of them are just seemingly humans. So I just, as any blissfully ignorant guy trying to enjoy their game, assumed they were all bad and proceeded to kill the shit out of them. See, the game puts you in this world and all you know about it is that, well, lots of bad things are happening in it. Basically everything else seemed too confusing, at least for me. This really hindered my desire to keep playing, because I awaited the moment I understood what's going on, but that moment never came. The story never gets you to care. It never tries to pull you in towards some sort of goal or meaning to all of this. It just goes and goes on its own without acknowledging that maybe there's players who don't know what's going on. You are on a quest to something for something because presumably things are going bad everywhere and those bad things are in your way, and it continued like this for as far as I have played, which is almost being done with the game. And unlike Souls games, the item descriptions, dialogue and cutscenes to some extent don't make any sense whatsoever. They all have these old school words structured in messy sentences, which sure keeps to the whole theme of the game and all, but when it comes at the price of enjoyment, at least it could have been made a bit more cohesive. And judging from the great amount of positive reviews and good word that surround the game, maybe this is a me problem. I won't lie when I say I'm unfamiliar with this kind of English, but I doubt I am the only one on this. I would just still like to shine a light on my experience, which seems to differ from others. I want to accept that a game might just not be for me in some aspects. But despite all that, the gameplay engaged me and kept me playing for a time. The gameplay of Blasphemous gave me a really good impression from early on that dwindled little by little the more time I played the game, but is still arguably a strong part of the game and what carried me through it the most. The controls for me felt weighty but at the same time smooth and precise enough to make for good platforming and movement. The only thing that felt a bit off is the dodge, but honestly it was negligible. The problem with the gameplay is not inherently your own controls, rather it's your ability to interact with the rest of the mechanics. The enemies at the start are fairly simple. They require a parry, or dodge, or maybe attacking a bit then backing off. Simple strategies really. The problem is that they never really evolve beyond that, and fighting them makes for the largest portion of what you'll be doing in the game. They still have the same mundane movesets with the simple solutions to each one. This enemy has a shield that you can't attack or dodge through, so what do? Wait for it to attack, then parry and counter attack. This one is in the air and attacks downwards. You attack it in the air, don't get beneath it. This enemy rushes at you, jump over him and hit him while he's staggered afterwards, and there's multiple ones that use a similar strategy even though they're bigger and seemingly more dangerous. What the game does to try and battle this is add platforming to the enemies. Add multiple different enemies or just put out many enemies at once. Almost all of these solutions turn up to be more frustrating than mechanically diverse. Some enemies simply don't make for balanced, fair fights when put together, and sections that include platforming and combat usually work, but some include falls and spikes, which, did I mention, fucking insta-kill you. This is one of the most annoying things in the game, even though it's one that in hindsight seems easy to tolerate, but the fact that it just exists makes you think, just why is this in the game? Did it just suddenly... What the fuck? Why did it just suddenly let go? Oh shit. Oh fuck. Ow. Oh fuck you! Okay, let's just get back then. No, actually I'm supposed to go forward. Yes. Or that. And I'm dead again. Oh! Come to me. Can you get... Thank you. I can't kill him. Spikes probably have the majority of my deaths in this game. Anyway, let's continue. Another disappointing part of this game is how you can upgrade your combat capabilities, which unfortunately is just a lie really. Your abilities or moves you can unlock are charged attack, a downward thrust from air, a dash attack, combo extenders, and a ranged attack. Turns out really only the dash attack and somewhat the combo extenders are useful to use. See, how it went for me while playing is that I took a while to get enough currency for my first upgrade, which was the charge attack, which I quickly realized was too slow to use on any enemy safely, so a while later to gather for my second upgrade, which was the downward thrust, and lo and behold, it's not just impractical to use but it's also mechanically weird. You have to be a certain height from the ground to reliably activate it, not to mention your character always has to do one normal attack before the move activates, and if you jump off the ground normally and use it, there's a good chance it will just decide to not, making you fall onto the graces of the enemy's hitbox, which, did I mention that there's contact damage in this game? Touching almost any enemy damages and staggers you, which opens you shortly to taking more damage from an enemy's attack. This is made more annoying if you mess up your dodge timing while trying to pass an enemy, but I digress. After getting through about 50% of the game, I got the dash attack, and quickly after I was able to upgrade it, and it just made the game more easy and simplistic because dash attacking any enemy does enormous damage quickly and most of the time safely too. Fair to say this didn't help me with wanting to continue the game. The last I got was the range attack, which I really just never used. Most of the time I just forgot that it existed. But that is far from the end of it. Blasphemous' main genre is seemingly Metroidvania. It is advertised to have many Metroidvania elements. Blasphemous tries to be a Metroidvania, and Blasphemous miserably fails to be one. One great example that's worth mentioning first is the fact that you can complete the whole game the same way you started your character without any extra upgrades. And honestly, you wouldn't notice much of a difference because, as I mentioned before, the gameplay is simplistic and requires the same solutions over and over. Another part is the exploration in this game that feels so unrewarding and confusing. First off, most of the rewards are just these bones that do literally nothing. Get an item descriptions for them that tells a small story and that's it. Seems that if you could collect all of them, some door would open, but I couldn't bother enough of that. Finding my way through the game took a lot more time than I think it should. And now that I have almost the whole map unlocked, I can see that I think you are supposed to go on a certain more linear path rather than sporadically explore and go different ways, which is what I did. And this led to a lot of useless wandering around and a myriad of other issues. There is a pattern of my playthrough of Blasphemous regarding its 50 to 60% mark of completion, because going through it, I did not find almost any of the upgrades I think I was supposed to find way earlier. I spent most of the time with two spells, the one you find mission at the tutorial and another one a bit later. I spent most of the time with only 2 rosary bead slots because I literally explored the area where the NPC that upgrades them last. Even though I had 3 of the materials that you could upgrade the slots with, I went through a large portion of the game without finding a single relic until I just assumed that they were just an illusion. Found most of the statues that upgrade your weapon later too, but that felt more intentional to me, so I went from needing 4 hits to kill a certain enemy to suddenly 2 because I found them rapidly afterwards. The last issue here is the backtracking. It is quite painful. You can only teleport around these limited portals around the map, which sure helps, but you will still need to traverse a good amount because these portals aren't near where you want to go. And with the lack of upgrades to your movement and usually the platforming you need to do and the traps you need to avoid along the way, it gets exhausting real quick. This would have been solved if they were to add teleporting between shrines, an easy solution to implement that won't mess around with much of the game. Except they did add that, at the cost of donating 20,000 currency to the church near the hub. Not only is that a lot of currency that you won't have access to until later in the game, where you won't even be needing the ability to travel between shrines much anymore, but also if you want to save up for it, it would take away from your sense of character progression since you won't be buying upgrades. Not to mention that you can't really figure this out except if you search on the internet. I really can't understand why they just didn't add that in the game. This section will be quite short, but I still feel the need to address this. A couple of mechanics in this game are sometimes inconsistent. The ledge grab activates a lot of times when you really don't want it to, getting you stuck. This is made worse by the fact that you have to press down to drop down, but can't press the jump button to jump off of it. This in platforming section is fine, you can manage it, but while in combat it threw me off more times than I could count, because it's the more intuitive thing to do. Some enemies' hitbox's design is outright baffling. These crawling enemies seem to have their hitbox from the back much larger than their front, which sometimes damages you when you jump past them. These ones with the chain bell have only the bell as a hitbox. The person has no contact damage, but the bell does, even if it is not moving or being used in an attack. This coupled with other regular enemies that have contact damage but only do long range attacks and stand still, and some have it as their only way of dealing damage like these jumpy ones. Overall, I couldn't really make much sense of it. There are also 2 bugs I recall through my playtime. One occurs with this enemy that has a high chance of bugging out if you parry it, making it invincible. This happened the first time in a room that gets locked until you clear out the enemies, so twice I had to just close my game and reset from the last shrine because the enemy bugged out. I searched about this and apparently this bug has existed in the game since almost the start, and it has just become the norm to fight this enemy without parrying, even though it is clear you are supposed to do so. The other one is not really a big deal, I just kept getting damaged for no reason one time until I died. Fortunately, I was near a shrine anyway. Still, for a game released 3 years ago that received many updates and DLCs, issues like this are the last thing you'd expect really. The last issue, although not that noticeable, is that bosses seem to be doing their moveset with extreme varying frequency, changing how difficult the fight can be depending on what attacks the bosses decide to use. Blasphemous is a game I really wanted to like. It's the game I came into ready to fully enjoy my time the whole way through. I've been hearing good things about the game for 3 years, but unfortunately the more time I played, the less I wanted to play. The problem with Blasphemous and similar games is that their different aspects have to be coherent with each other and fit in the whole package. Each aspect alone can't carry the game, but each one builds up on the other to enhance the experience. And in Blasphemous, each of those aspects are lacking in some way, so when they're put together, it makes a jumbled jigsaw puzzle that's missing pieces in many places, and it all just crumbles apart. In the end, at about 87% completion, I just decided to drop the game and not continue. I bet I was like 1 or 2 bosses away from finishing it, but I just couldn't really get myself to. So I almost kill him and he just does this bullshit. Please die. Thank you, I would have not liked to fight you again. Oh my god. Requiem Tournament, whatever the hell. I'd like leaving the game now actually, and uninstalling it. I honestly do. Because like, This is my Blasphemous critique, hope you enjoyed and have a good night.